In the very heart of a festive, yet profoundly indifferent New York City, where the neon blaze of Broadway finally surrendered to the quiet, cobblestone lanes of Greenwich Village, stood the Echo Atelier. It was an ancient, imposing structure, a former ballroom, where time itself seemed to have ceased its passage. Inside, a perpetual twilight reigned, steeped in the compounded scent of aged wood, dust, and promises long since forgotten. For Ariadne, a lighting designer from modern New York, the place became an instant refuge from the ceaseless metropolitan rush, a quiet sanctuary where she sought inspiration for her newest, most nostalgic project. On this Christmas Eve, as the city exploded around her in blinding lights and torrents of hurried humanity, she deliberately chose the silence of the atelier. Her solitude held no fear for her. Rather, it merely accentuated a deep, inexplicable feeling that here, among the lingering shadows, she was fundamentally not alone. Exactly 97 years earlier, within the very same hall, Julian, a young artist, was wrestling with the gnawing cold and despair. It was December 1928. His studio, rented with his last meager funds, was utterly frozen, and the light from the gas lamps barely managed to pierce the heavy, ceaseless snowfall. Unlike the dazzling future, his city glowed with a soft, sepia-toned yellow, yet this brilliance offered him no warmth. He was profoundly alone in the midst of a crowd. His ambitions melted like the ice forming on the windowsill, and even the faint Christmas melodies drifting from the closed doors of neighboring speakeasies sounded like a cruel mockery. Julian sought inspiration, but found only his own desperate shadow reflected back. He stood by the tall, fogged window, acutely aware that his life, much like his canvases, remained tragically unfinished. On Christmas Eve, as the city beyond Ariadne's window clamored with horns and the amplified cheer of holiday carols, she was setting up her lighting equipment in the atelier. Suddenly, on the mirrored surface of an antique cabinet, she saw something. It was not her own reflection. It was the barely discernible, translucent figure of a man in an old-fashioned coat. He stood in a part of the hall that Ariadne knew only through imagination, looking at her with an incredible, quiet yearning. He was enveloped in the soft, golden light of the old city. Simultaneously, Julian, lifting his head from his easel, saw his own room, illuminated by a strange, cold, bluish light emanating from the translucent silhouette of a woman holding a glowing artifact. Both froze. They realized that their worlds, separated by almost a century, had converged at this single, unwavering point in space. Their initial reaction was pure stupefaction, yet curiosity soon prevailed. Julian approached the window. Behind him, Ariadne saw not the dim glow of the 1,928 gas lamps, but the chaotic, pulsating glare of modern neon advertisements. He, in turn, saw nothing behind her but deep, impenetrable darkness, and in one particular spot, strange, bright, rapidly moving lights, like fireflies. This visual dissonance was their first silent conversation. To prove his presence, Julian left a small, yellowed brass thimble on the dusty table, one his mother had once used for mending. Ariadne, arriving the next day, only sensed a faint, antique, metallic odor, but clearly saw the trace left in the dust where he had stood. In response, she left a tiny, intensely blue LED bulb in the very same spot. These minute gestures, unseen by the wider world, became their secret language. The exchange continued, and with each passing day, their invisible bond grew stronger. Julian, feeling he must share his own version of Christmas, one quieter, more intimate, left a dried pine branch, which he had found on the snowy street, on the windowsill. He had hoped Ariadne would sense the scent of pine needles, but in her time, the fragrance had long evaporated, leaving behind only a dry, fragile stem, like an ancient memory. Yet, when Ariadne arrived and saw the brittle branch, her heart tightened with sadness, realizing she could never truly touch his era. To comfort her invisible counterpart, she took a small candle, scented with cinnamon and orange, a classic aroma of her modern Christmas from her bag, and lit it in the corner. Julian, upon returning to his frozen atelier, did not see the candle, but his room was filled with a powerful, warm aroma he had never known before, yet which instantly filled him with the spirit of holiday anticipation, home, and comfort. Inspired by the sudden warmth and the ethereal connection, Julian returned to his abandoned notes. He could not speak, but he could write music. The inspiration he had sought had finally reached him from the future. He composed a small, elegiac waltz, slow, yet full of anticipation and unspoken feeling. He rolled the sheet into a slender scroll, tied it with a yellowed thread, and tucked it into a tiny, unseen crevice he discovered in the ancient wall, hoping the paper, preserved within that structure, might cross the barrier of time. Ariadne, following a keen intuition, examined the wall and found the delicate yellowed manuscript. They were notes written in a hand she did not know, yet which felt incredibly familiar and kindred. She understood. This was his voice, his silent confession. She resolved that she must return his melody to him, and that this music would serve as their only perfect rendezvous. While Ariadne practiced the waltz on the piano at her apartment, feeling that every note was his touch, New York City, on Christmas Eve, 2025, reached the zenith of its holiday splendor. The electric string lights on Fifth Avenue shone like scattered stardust, and people, wrapped in thick scarves, hurried with gifts, their faces bright with expectation. At the same time, Julian, in 1928, looked out at the shop windows, which, for the first time, seemed to glow brighter, specifically for him. He saw things he had always ignored: genuine smiles, the bustling hurry of passers-by, the warmth emanating from the doors of restaurants where live jazz played. The city of 1928, for the first time, appeared not as a prison, but as a stage where a miracle was about to unfold. He knew that miracle would be her return to the atelier, and he waited. Finally, the culmination night arrived. At 11:55 p.m., as the clock on the nearest church was poised to strike midnight, Ariadne returned to the Echo Atelier. She brought with her a small antique gramophone and a record onto which she had pressed the performance of Julian's waltz. The music filled the hall, becoming a material, acoustic bridge between the epochs. In 1928, Julian heard his waltz loud, clear, and alive, as if an orchestra were playing directly in his room. He saw Ariadne's silhouette, which was no longer hazy, but almost tangible, glowing with a soft, modern light. He approached her, without touching, and began to dance, leading her with an invisible hand across the old, dusty ballroom floor, enveloped by the music of his past and her future. In the moment of their silent waltz, the atelier was transfigured. The light from Ariadne's gramophone, mingled with the illumination from Julian's gas lamp, created a strange, golden blue glow, as if their respective centuries had merged into one single, perfect instant. Ariadne could clearly see the furniture that no longer existed through his translucent silhouette. Julian, in turn, could see the ghostly outlines of modern equipment through her semi-transparent form. They were utterly focused on each other, paying no mind to the world that surrounded them. In their dance, there was no sadness, only the pure, unspoken joy of finding one another. It was a perfect, completed scene, a moment perfectly caught between two centuries. When the final notes of the waltz dissolved into the silence, they stood frozen. The hour granted to them by fate was drawing to a close. Julian walked toward the window through which he had once stared into his lonely future. Ariadne stood opposite him, her face wet with tears, yet alight with a smile. He raised his hand and pressed his palm against the glass, knowing this was his last, most vital gesture. It was not a farewell, but a promise sealed in a tangible trace. In that same moment, Ariadne watched as his silhouette began to fade, and with it, the warmth disappeared. In desperation, she stretched out her own palm toward the glass, yearning to touch him. Time on both sides struck midnight, and Julian vanished, leaving behind only silence and a powerful, almost physical imprint of his presence. Ariadne remained alone in the quiet, empty atelier. The modern light died away, and she slowly approached the window. Outside, a heavy, festive snow fell, wrapping the city in a Christmas blanket. On the glass, she saw what should not have been there: the indelible, slightly fogged imprint of a man's palm. It was on the far side, in the exact spot where she had pressed her own hand. It was his confirmation. She placed her palm over his print and felt a faint, yet real, warmth that nearly a century could not extinguish. Ariadne then left the atelier. Now, New York, though still bustling, no longer felt lonely. She had not received a gift from him, but something far greater: the proof of an eternal connection, sealed in a single, indissoluble trace on the glass, shining on Christmas night, which became her personal, unbreakable echo of Christmas.